joke that it was like 7 hours.
You're welcome.
Mark told me 10 years of talking.
So should I just go, right?
Mike, you should introduce.
Yes.
Good morning. Welcome to everyone who's here in Blacksburg with us today and to everyone watching on the live stream. I'd like to introduce Professor Marc Edwards to share with us the latest results, and I believe that some members of Marc's team will also be speaking. And what I'd ask is each one of you comes up, if you could just give your name as well before you speak, that would be great. Thanks, Dr. Edwards.
Well, thank you all for tuning in here today. It's been a very busy summer of activities in Flint, and as you're aware, this disaster response has been just a massive undertaking involving both the federal government, state, city government, and they've been working diligently throughout the summer, as have third parties such as Virginia Tech. And what we wanted to do today was to report on the results of 3 studies that have just been completed. The first of which is the 3rd round of citizen-led water testing done in consumers' homes. And this was first done in August of 2015 that exposed the widespread lead and water contamination in the city of Flint. And this is a citizen-led effort supported by Virginia Tech. So the lead was LeeAnne Walters in all 3 rounds of the testing. And Flint residents in the last 2 rounds have been paid through Virginia Tech by a grant from the US EPA. Of course, the first round was volunteer. The second study we're going to be reporting on today was a special project that looked at water heaters throughout the city of Flint, specifically in private homes. And as you know, during the time period of Flint Water, the city of Flint had one of the largest Legionella outbreaks in U.S. history, many deaths. There's every reason to think that that was due to the time period in corrosion of the Flint River water. And when we went there in August 2015, we found very low levels of Legionella in homes, but later in 2015 we found high levels of Legionella in large buildings. So because everyone's taking the Legionella threat so seriously, we went back this summer to see again what the status of Legionella is in Flint single-family homes and to see whether cleaning water heaters might make a difference in terms of improving the water quality. So this research was funded by the state of Michigan, led by William Rhoads and Taylor Bradley. And we will also report on our continued monitoring of disinfection byproducts in Flint cold and hot water, because this is still a concern in the city. So with that, I will turn this over to Kelsey, and who's going to talk about the 3rd round of lead results in Flint homes.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I am Dr. Kelsey Piper, USDA Fellow in Marc Edwards' lab, and I'm going to talk about our 3 rounds of sampling to give the 1-year overview of what's been occurring. So as Dr. Edwards mentioned, this was a collaboration with the Flint residents led by LeeAnne Walters. We would assemble kits at Virginia Tech, drive them up, and then the residents would take over, engaging with the homeowners to sample the waters. They were out of 2 Flint churches, and then any requests to have them specially delivered, they would take that to them. So across all 3 sampling periods, we used the same sampling protocol. We asked that homeowners sample their cold water tap from an outlet they consumed for drinking water. The homeowners were asked to let the water sit for a minimum of 6 hours of stagnation, and then they were to collect the first 1-liter draw of water, known as the first draw. This is in keeping with what the LCR says by the EPA. The homeowners were then asked to flush the water for 45 seconds and collect a half a liter of water, which we refer to as our 1-minute flush. And then they were asked to flush the water for 2 additional minutes and collect a 125 milliliter bottle, which we refer to as our 3-minute flush. We had 3 sampling rounds in August of 2015, March of 2016, and then July of 2016. In total, we had 126 homeowners participate in all 3 efforts. And so this is the data we're going to be presenting on those homeowners. So before the Flint water crisis, Flint was supplied by the Detroit Water. They used corrosion control chemicals, orthophosphate inhibitors. What the point of this is to create corrosion protective layer scales that would reduce the amount of lead in water. With the switch to the Flint River water, this practice of adding orthophosphate inhibitors or corrosion control chemicals was discontinued. This led to the breakdown of the protective corrosion layers and the buildup of loose lead and scale sediment along the pipes. When we first sampled in August 2015, we sampled this condition and we found that the 90th percentile lead value was almost 2 times the EPA action level. So this is how we identified that there was a system-wide lead and water contamination event occurring in Flint, Michigan. In November and December of 2015, Flint switched back to Detroit Water, and along with what Detroit was adding, Flint added additional corrosion inhibitors to really help rebuild that corrosion protective scale layer to reduce lead in water. Unfortunately, there was low water use, low flow being done, and that loose leaded sediment was not being flushed out, and the scale was not developing as quickly as it would have been with higher flow rates. We noticed this when we went back and did our March 2016 sampling effort. In 162 homes, our 90th percentile lead value was 1.5 times the lead action level. We saw reduction from the previous effort due to this intervention, but the concentrations were still high. There was still widespread lead and water contamination. After our sampling round, the EPA began encouraging homeowners to use their water at high flow rates and to continuously, regularly use it through subsidized water bills. They were using the same chemistry, adding the extra corrosion control inhibitors, but now we were having high flow rates, so we're active flushing out those pipes and removing all of that unstable scale that had built up. As of July 2016, we found that the 90th percentile lead level was 13.9, below the EPA action level. So we're seeing a reduction in lead in drinking water. But there's one thing I would like to point out is that this is not this is not an LCR approved sampling protocol. This is voluntary random sampling in Flint. It is showing that we're seeing reduced concentrations due to these intervention efforts. Another way just to look at this to show that the system is healing and water conditions are improving, looking at how many homes had non-detectable lead concentrations in their first draw of water. In August 2015, only 9% of homes had non-detectable levels. In July 2016, it was 5 times higher, at 45% of our homeowners having non-detectable levels of lead. So again, going back to the system is healing, we're seeing reductions in lead in water. However, homeowners in Flint should continue to follow the state and EPA's advice of using their lead filters and continuing to drink bottled water until otherwise advised by the state or EPA. Another concern in Flint was the amount of iron in the water noted by the red or rusty water complaints. In August 2015, we had high levels of iron above the EPA's aesthetic standard. In July 2016, we have seen reductions in iron as well. We're seeing anywhere from 35 to 64% reduction across our 3 samples. So again, we're seeing improvements in water conditions, improvements in the amount of corrosion occurring. So just to kind of conclude, we're saying that it's not possible that Flint may be meeting the lead action level. However, again, it's important to stress that this is a random voluntary sample. We do not target high-risk homes as the LCR does. We are seeing that in this 1-year period between August 2015 and July 2016, our lead and iron levels are and have been continuing to decrease. But homeowners should continue to follow what the EPA and the state are recommending and using their lead filters in bottled water until they're advised otherwise. So with that, I'd like to introduce Taylor Bradley, who will be talking about the Flint Water Heater Study.
Thank you, Kelsey. Once again, I'm Taylor Bradley, and I'll be introducing the Flint Water Heater Study that we conducted at the end of June. Before we go into the details of this study, I'd like to talk a little bit about Legionella. So the Legionella bacteria is responsible for Legionnaire's disease, which is a severe pneumonia. Not only does it cause Legionnaire's disease, it can also cause Pontiac fever, which is similar to the flu. On the graph, you can see that soon after the switch to Flint River water, there was an upspike in the summer months of confirmed cases of Legionnaire's disease. Not only did this occur in 2014, it also occurred in the summer months of 2015, where you see that upspike in Legionnaire's disease also. This is related to our study because the temperatures found during those summer months are similar to those found in the water heaters. So now it's important for us to connect Legionella growth with water heaters. So there's some causes of Legionella growth in the water heaters. The first is the sediment accumulation. So in a lot of water heaters, there's sediment that accumulates in the bottom of the water heater. This includes calcium carbonate, sand, and corrosion byproducts. This sediment can interfere with the chlorine residuals. So pretty much, the more sediment there is, the lower the chlorine levels, the more surface area for microbial growth, such as Legionella. Another topic that we should take into consideration is the temperature. As seen throughout many water heaters that we've tested, there's a gradient of temperature. The top of the water heater seems to be a lot more hotter than the bottom. Now this is not saying that the water at the bottom is not hot, but it is a cooler temperature, which is a better condition for bacteria such as Legionella to grow. Another thing is the water heater temperature setting. So most homeowners are not aware of the temperature setting on their water heater. This is normally at a default temperature setting, which is the lowest. Now this is not a problem, but it does pose a risk because that temperature is not as high to kill off the bacteria like Legionella that could possibly grow at the bottom of the water heater. So we're thinking rapid chlorine decay, sedimentation, and low temperatures could possibly lead to Legionella growth. So now that we've connected Legionella to the water heaters, we'd like to talk about the goals of this study. So I mentioned before that we were interested in determining how much sediment is at the bottom of the water heater. Not only do we want to determine how much, we want to know what that sediment is composed of. Secondly, we'd like to know if Legionella is actually present in the water heaters. Not only in the water heaters, but is it present in the in-home plumbing system in general? Lastly, we'd like to test the effectiveness of a simple flushing protocol to determine if the water quality will improve after cleaning these water heaters. So we'd just like to say this was a really intense effort. We were on the ground in Flint for 2 weeks. We sampled 30 homes, 4 electric and 26 gas water heaters. The first week we went in, we sampled and we flushed the water heaters. The second week we went back and we just simply sampled. There were 2 teams of 7 graduate and undergraduate students who worked extremely hard to collect all of these samples. It could be anywhere from 45 minutes to 3 hours that it took to sample all of the homes, or an individual home. There were also 3 community volunteers that helped us along the way, and 3 plumbers that were contracted through MDQ. So there was a very strategic sampling approach. The first samples were taken in the kitchen. This is the cold water stagnant and the hot water stagnant samples. That third sample was collected in the bathroom. Now this is a shower sample, and this is very important because when the water is coming out of the shower, it can become aerosolized. If that water is contaminated and people are breathing it in while they're showering, it can pose a health risk. This fourth sample is the hot flush sample, which is also back in the kitchen. The fifth sample is the drain valve sample, which is taken from the water heater itself. And the sixth sample is the cold flush sample, which is taken at the hose bib on the outside of the house. Now this sample is to determine what's going on in the distribution system. Now like many homes across the United States, water heaters tend to be very dirty. So you will see here that here's a picture of visual sedimentation and particles on one of the samples that we took from the drain valve in one of the homes. On the flip side, some of the water heaters had very clear effluent with no visual particles or sediments. After all of the sampling was done in the homes, students then moved on to flushing. We did a 3-phase flushing protocol. All of the water was initially drained from the water heater through the drain valve. Once it was almost empty, we moved to phase 2. and that's when we allow the water from the incoming cold water to scour the bottom of the water heater to disturb that sediment. We really wanted to disturb as much sediment as we could so that it would drain out of the drain valve. Phase 3 includes actually taking that drain valve off, sticking a brush in there, and really getting all of that sediment off of the bottom of the water heater. This is also followed by a series of scours from that cold water influent tube to really make sure that if the first scour didn't get it and the brush didn't get it, maybe the scour will get the rest of the debris out. So now that we have our sampling and our flushing protocols, we'll go ahead and move into the hypotheses of this study. And my colleague William Rhoads will finish it off for me. Thank you guys.
Okay, hello. I'm William Rhoads. I'm a PhD candidate in civil engineering here. And we really had 3 general hypotheses related to this project. And I'm going to touch on the first 2 and then go into more detail about the third one that regards Legionella growth. And we have a draft report right now, and as soon as we finalize it, we'll be releasing that for everyone to see. Our first hypothesis was that flushing the water heaters will remove the accumulated sediment in the water heater tank, and that will in turn decrease the levels of inorganic contaminants like lead, copper, and iron in people's homes. However, to our surprise, flushing had no effect on the levels of these contaminants at the taps within people's homes or within the water heater tank itself, which means that our one-time flushing protocol was really not sufficient to remove 100% of the accumulated sediment. The second hypothesis we had was that flushing the water heaters would also help to maintain a higher chlorine residual in the water heater and the hot water system within people's homes. But again, we found out that flushing did not actually change the chlorine levels from before to after our flushing protocol was implemented. However, the median chlorine residual that we detected in the cold flush samples, so the water coming into people's homes, was 0.6 milligrams per liter. So chlorine levels in the distribution system were generally high at the time that we conducted our testing, and I believe that they would be sufficient to prevent microbial regrowth. For our last hypothesis, because we had not detected culturable Legionella in a previous sampling of 22 small buildings in Flint, we thought that there would be very low colonization of Legionella in residential water heaters and homes as well. But the state, because due to the nature of the Legionnaire's disease outbreaks in the previous 2 summers, wanted to make sure that we were very thoroughly looking for Legionella in people's homes to ensure that, that there was not a risk there. In addition, we thought that if there was culturable Legionella in people's homes, that the levels would improve as we flush the water heaters. And when we talk about Legionella, the cause of Legionnaire's disease and Pontiac fever, it's important to recognize that Legionella is a very large group of microorganisms, and it's really a smaller subset of Legionella species and subspecies classifications that we're most concerned with from a public health perspective. One of those classifications is called Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1, which is a type of Legionella that is identified in 85 of clinical isolates. A further classification of Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1 is Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1 that is also positive for a monoclonal antibody called MAB2. And this particular strain of Legionella is observed in up to 94% of Legionnaire's disease outbreak cases. So, to recap, it's Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1, and more specifically, Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1 that is MAB2 positive that we're most concerned with from a public health perspective. And to put our results that I'm going to show into context, we wanted to bring in previous field studies, field surveys that were representative of background concentrations as well as something that would be considered a high concentration or colonization rates of Legionella. So for background colonization rates, we can look at a study from 1991 done in Quebec, Canada, where they went into 211 homes and they had 105 Legionella isolates, 10 of which were Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1. So about 10% is kind of background in terms of Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1 colonization. For a higher colonization rate, we can turn to previous work done by our group in Flint, Michigan, where we were looking at large buildings, and we went to 65 sampling sites in large multi-story buildings, and we saw that 23% were colonized by Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1, so kind of double what we saw in the background, 9.5%, and 15% were colonized by Legionella pneumophila serogroup 1 that was also MAB2 positive. So 23 and 15% are kind of higher benchmarks for colonization rates. For this study, before the flushing occurred, we saw that 1 out of the 32 houses that we sampled during the first week of our study, or 3 out of the total 192 samples, were positive for Legionella pneumophila. And it is important to note that none of these were serogroup 1 or MAB2 positive. And this 3 and 1.6% is a low colonization rate, even relative to what we would consider background colonization of Legionella in homes. After our flushing protocol was implemented, we saw that 2 out of 30 houses, or 4 out of a total of 180 samples collected, were positive for Legionella pneumophila, and all of these samples taken during the second week were serogroup 1 and MAB2 positive, which is the strain of Legionella that we're most concerned with. However, the colonization rates of Legionella in these homes was still very low. So in terms of our hypothesis, we confirmed that Legionella colonization rates in Flint are very low compared to levels of concern and even relative to background levels of colonization. And we determined that flushing did not help eliminate or reduce the incidence of Legionella in Flint homes. So to reiterate our conclusions from this portion of our study, we conclude that a one-time flushing of water heaters does not significantly reduce inorganic contaminants within people's homes, nor does it help to increase the amount of chlorine observed in these homes. However, at the time of sampling, chlorine levels in the distribution system in Flint were generally high, and we determined that Legionella colonization rates were very low, and flushing did not remove culturable Legionella from the one home that was positive before sampling. So at this point, our recommendation is that a one-time short-term cleaning program to improve the water quality in homes in Flint in terms of Legionella control and reducing inorganic contaminants is not recommended. We would like to acknowledge our team here that spent 2 weeks doing this work, of course the MDQ for funding the work, and we would like to recognize the volunteers that were with us on the ground in Flint from Orchard Children's Services, and of course the residents in Flint who participated in this study. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Edwards, and he's going to talk about disinfection byproducts on behalf of our colleagues at the University of Massachusetts.
Thank you, William. And this part will be very brief because it's a continuation of a long-term effort to monitor for disinfection byproducts in the Flint water system. Now, just to recap, when we went up in August 2015, we did sample for disinfection byproducts in Flint cold and hot water, found very normal levels of these contaminants. In January of this year, there was a team from outside Flint that came in and said they measured disinfection byproducts in Flint, cold and hot water, and found astronomical levels, unprecedented levels, and that these chemicals were posing a serious danger to Flint residents. And some residents were scared by that. decided to stop bathing or showering because of that, and we all know bathing and showering is an important public health hygiene activity, and if you don't engage in that, sickness can result. And there was a spike in gastrointestinal upset that resulted from this, we believe, in Flint. And this is all hinging on the Flint residents' very legitimate fears that they are experiencing breathing difficulties or rashes from exposure to the water. And we feel very strongly that these fears are justified because they occur all over the United States. There's a certain subset of the population that when they're exposed to water in their cities, they do experience breathing difficulties or rashes. And so we took this very, very seriously. On my website, I mentioned my daughter had these problems when she was young, and we live in the national forest and have our own well. And so the fact that you're experiencing these problems, and they are very, very serious, doesn't mean necessarily that your water is contaminated with high levels of disinfection byproducts, as some have implied. So given the widespread concern about this in the community, we recruited a fourth party, a team from the University of Massachusetts and another team from the University of South Carolina, the foremost experts on disinfection byproducts in the world, to come in and conduct a fourth party examination of what's happening with disinfection byproducts in Flint. We had a press conference in May of this year where we initially reported the result that, as expected, the levels of disinfection byproducts in Flint, cold and hot water, were completely normal. We have continued those studies. There was another sampling event that was done by UMass in May 31st of this year, and we just got the results 2 days ago. So we're presenting those. They're still in draft form. And let me point out that this research, the sampling, was funded by the EPA, but our comments here have not been reviewed by the EPA, nor have they necessarily reflect the agency's point of view. But just to remind you, our key point from the May 31st press conference was that there's absolutely nothing unusual detected by either EPA, UMass, or Virginia Tech occurring in Flint hot or cold water relative to disinfection byproducts, contrary to the claims of some outside groups. We did another sampling. The UMass team actually drove from UMass to Flint to sample 2 houses that had always been on Detroit water, 2 buildings always on Detroit water, and 2 houses in Flint, because it's been speculated something very bad happened during this time period on the Flint River water that might somehow make the Flint system create disinfection byproducts, even though that violates accepted laws of chemistry and physics. So the team actually drove to Flint, drove back. As you can see, there's 11 members of this team. They executed one of the most thorough independent evaluations of DBPs that's ever been done. And so this report will be released in the next couple of weeks, but I just wanted to show you, these are all of the different analyses that were done. These are not typical. These are very cutting edge, advanced techniques that not only look at regulated disinfection byproducts, but hundreds of unregulated disinfection byproducts. And the key takeaway message from this second sampling, and there's going to be another round of sampling because this is still a concern in the community, is that there is nothing unusual or alarming happening with respect to disinfection byproducts in Flint hot or cold water. The levels are perfectly normal relative to other cities in the United States. And we expect to find these because if we eliminated formation of disinfection byproducts by not putting disinfectant in the water, thousands of people would die from waterborne disease. And amongst the diseases we're concerned about are Legionella. So with that, we'll thank everyone for participating, and if you have any questions, I believe there's a way to call in. Yeah.
Right, so let's start with taking questions from the room. Anybody here have questions for Mark or the team?
I'll start.
Yes. Okay.
Are you impressed with these results? Is this what you were expecting?
Well, you know, it is. So let's look at what's happened since the city was on Flint River water. We not only accomplished what was once considered impossible, switching back to Detroit water, but the EPA experts and others implemented some of the best corrosion control that's being practiced in the United States. So Flint has been getting that water now to help heal its pipes for about 6 months. And when we saw that the healing process was slower than we expected and figured out it was partly because Flint residents were using relatively low amounts of water for a variety of reasons, there was actually a forgiveness program wherein for the month of May, the state actually paid residents water bills so that they could use as much water as they wanted to flush at no cost. And not all the Flint residents did that, but enough of them did so they really started drawing this water through the system in combination with other things that the EPA has implemented. So we really felt that things were going to be healing better, more in line with what we see in other systems. And in addition, realize this is amongst the hottest months that we did the sampling. So comparing now to March when the water was colder, based on that alone, you'd expect lead levels to be higher because the water's warmer. But instead, they were markedly lower. So this really shows that the corrosion control and all the things that are being implemented by the feds and the state and the city are really working, and Flint's system is on its way to recovery. Now, that doesn't mean the current situation is acceptable. But this process of healing is going to continue. Once it gets momentum, the healing really tends to pick up. So I think in the next 6 months to a year, we're going to see dramatic improvements. It's very possible that if a legitimate lead and copper sampling was done today, the city of Flint would pass that sampling. And as you know, based on what we said since August 2015, there's no way prior to this that Flint was meeting the lead and copper rule. So this is a big improvement. And of course, as you all know, meeting the lead and copper rule is not, nothing to brag about. We know that the current lead and copper rule is not adequately protected, but we're just pointing out that things are on their way. Certainly, Flint residents should continue to use the bottled water in filters. All the studies have shown that the filters are working very, very effectively, even in the worst case Flint waters. So until there's actually some kind of notification from the EPA and the state that the water is safe to drink, no one is saying the water is safe to drink yet. All Flint residents, regardless of your prior test results, should continue to make use of those filters that are being made available to you. In terms of the water heater study, we are kind of surprised, frankly. We thought that cleaning out these water heaters might improve the situation. In the back of our minds, we were hoping that maybe by cleaning out the water heaters, we'd get at the root cause of some of these rash and breathing difficulty problems, which we are taking very seriously. And we've said from the start, for the percent of Flint's population that's experiencing these, some of these we do think are some way related to the water, but just in the same way that they're related to water exposures in other cities all around the United States. And despite what was a very intensive cleaning effort, we worked on cleaning some of these water heaters for almost 4 hours in some cases. We could not see any observable improvement of the water after that cleaning. And so in general, the situation of the water heaters before cleaning was good. The Legionella levels were very low relative to the large buildings in Flint. So this is a testament, I think, to the fact that how the distribution system is being operated now, good chlorine residuals, a lot of flushing. But we'll point out that even in August 2015, when we sampled these small homes, we found no detectable Legionella pneumophila in the small homes, even though we thought we'd find it. We did find it in the large buildings where a lot of the disease is thought to have been acquired. So the water heater result, that was something of a surprise to us. The disinfection byproducts, no surprise there. We've been sampling this for a year now. We've been sampling hot and cold water. There's no problem with disinfection byproducts in the city of Flint. Doesn't mean that the levels are undetectable, but this idea that there's this unprecedented high exposure and that Flint health ailments can be traced to high levels of chloroform or other disinfection byproducts is frankly just absurd.
So I just thought I heard you say that Flint is now passing the lead and copper rule, but I thought that they technically never failed it.
Okay, so that, first off, we're not saying that they are currently meeting the lead and copper rule. They could be meeting the lead and copper rule. We think that our sampling pool of these 161 homes, there are reasons that it has actually turned out to be a very high-risk pool. And this pool could actually be a legitimate sampling pool, but we're not going to go through the steps to prove that. In order to pass the lead and copper rule, you have to have a sampling pool that is approved under the EPA lead and copper rule. It has to have at least 50% of the houses have lead pipe. And then you go into these homes, take the samples just like we did, and then you can calculate the 90th percentile. So I want to make perfectly clear, we did not do that here. We think we have a pool that's very close to that, or might even be worse than a legitimate EPA lead and copper pool. So it is very possible that the city of Flint is passing lead and copper, but we cannot say that. What we can say is the trend is very, very good. The lead levels now are probably lower than they've been for a long, long time. Okay, so the second part of your question, and that has been creating a lot of confusion. Flint, according to the official reports, never met the lead and copper rule in 2015 when all these problems with elevated lead were occurring and the neighborhoods had children with higher elevated blood lead. And then in 2016, the lead level shot up in their official sampling. So they actually did fail in the last round. So that is being construed by some that things have gotten worse or they haven't gotten better. When in fact, we've argued from the start, and it's now been acknowledged, that the way it was being sampled in 2015 by the state was not legal. They were not sampling enough homes with lead pipe. So those numbers should be just thrown out and forgotten about. Okay, so the whole idea that Flint was meeting the lead and copper rule, frankly, to me, just shows what a joke that the lead and copper rule is on the American people. But that last round, they did a legitimate sampling. They were just barely over the action level. So the sample results from 2016 onwards by the state can be trusted, and they were over the action level in 2016. But that does not mean things got worse. What our data clearly shows, things are dramatically better now than they were in 2015. That's why EPA funded this work, because this sampling approach that started with the volunteer work with Flint residents, this is the only way we can compare what's going on in the system, because that August 2015 sampling is the only legitimate set of samples from that time period. So we're very appreciative of the EPA for funding this, and it's kind of got its finger on the pulse of what's really happening to corrosion control in the Flint system. The iron levels are much better as well. Now that's not to say things are good enough. No one's satisfied at this point, but all the indicators are that we're heading in the right direction.
So if the state has been paying to help with the flushing, if that ends and they stop flushing, could this be reversed if they don't switch out the pipes then, or?
Okay, so we don't think that those benefits are going to be reversed. We think from here on in, the wind is kind of at our back, and as long as the good corrosion control is continued, which it will be, things are destined to be better every single monitoring round for the next year or so. I think we'll see that. That's historically what's happened in other cities who've seen these types of problems, Washington, D.C., elsewhere. Once this phosphate starts to work, it really does yield dramatic improvements over the course of a year and a half. Ultimately, you would like to see the lead pipes get out of the system, but even if we get the lead pipes out of the system, there's still lead plumbing. It's not going to get rid of the lead problems. Getting the lead pipes, the lead plumbing out, that's might very well across the country take 100 years before we get all the lead plumbing out.
Stacey, do we have the volume up on the speakerphone and see if you have any questions from them?
Q&A session has started. To ask your question, please press
Okay, so we're open up for phone questions now, if people have them. Any other questions from
So
people?
I promise just one last.
Sure,
last
all
one.
right. We're here, ask all the questions you got.
I believe this is your first study that the state of Michigan has actually paid for. Did I get that wrong?
That's correct.
So how does that feel that a year and a half ago, they were fighting you, saying you were crazy, and now they're actually paying you and respecting your research?
Well, I have said since the time the state of Michigan acknowledged there was a problem in early October, I have been completely satisfied, with their response. They took quick actions to have children protected, filters were made available, bottled water was made available. Since January, I've been satisfied with everyone's response since the declaration of the federal emergency. So I guess it's, I just feel like this is how science should work. People are doing their jobs, and they're doing them well. Anyone who has looked at the federal employees who have been deployed in Flint, the state employees, they're all trying their best. The city is. So I just feel this is how the system should work. And the fact that we were once criticized for what we did, it's old news to me.
And then I just heard you mention bottled water. We've been hearing reports that the donations are drying up. How much of a problem could that be for Flint residents if they're not getting this donated water anymore?
Well, I don't think it's a bigger problem than it is in other cities at this point. So first off, we've been to many of the homes, and many residents have large stockpiles, and I'm actually a little bit worried about all these bottled water being stored in hot garages, hot spaces all summer. And is that better than tap water at this point? I think that that might even be debated. The other issue is that there were initially concerns that the filters might not be protective above 150 parts per billion, but the EPA, the Center for Disease Control, they did a good study and looked at this very, very carefully, and there's every reason to believe the water coming from those filters in terms of lead is every bit as good and perhaps even in some cases better than the bottled water. So the plans I have heard have all made it clear that filters will be available to Flint residents until some months after they start meeting the lead and copper. So I think this is how it should be. It's erring on the side of caution, and there's every reason to believe that the water from those filters is every bit as good, if not better, than the quality of the bottled water.
Okay, I'll stop now, I promise.
Okay. Any other questions at this point?
Do you have any questions?
It sounds like nothing from the phone, so I think we're, unless somebody speak up now, I think we're good.
Well, I mean, what's the future hold? I mean, are you planning on continuing this at all? Is there any kind of, I know you're getting funding and all that. Just talk about moving forward.
Well, I think anyone who knows this team at Virginia Tech knows we're going to try to stay engaged with or without funding. We had absolutely no funding at all through January of this year, so we almost put 9 months of our lives into this without a penny of reimbursement. So I think this is nearing the end, the beginning of the end of the public health disaster response. Flint waters now look like it's entering a range that's considered normal for other U.S. cities. But there are other phases to the recovery that are important, that are going to require our attention. And hold on just 1 second. We'll get this in just a second. Okay. So there are other elements of the disaster response that are going to take a long time. Repairing Flint's infrastructure is something that's going to require tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And how to achieve that, where's the funding going to come from? Because as I've said repeatedly, paying to get this distribution system repaired up to modern standards, where it's financially sustainable for the city of Flint, that's not something the city of Flint can afford. And in fact, if you look across the country, there are many cities like Flint, post-industrial cities, rural America, where the population simply cannot afford to keep their infrastructure up. So, I'm hoping that we can use Flint as a test place, if you will, on how we're going to re-engineer and fix the infrastructure so that those residents who are living in those cities, our fellow Americans, can have a basic level of civilization where they can have water that's safe to drink and bathe in, and water bills that are affordable. So that's a major part of this response that's going to have to go on for 2 to 3 years in the future. And we will try our best to help out with that as well. Yep, go ahead on the phone.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, we can hear you.
Joel, did you have a question, Joel?
You might have to turn up the volume on that speakerphone there.
Okay. Are you on the phone? We can hear you. Can you ask your question?
Can you try to?
Maybe disappear?
It's muted or something on the other.
Well, I could hear him and I haven't touched anything, so.
Hello?
Yes,
I
go
would
ahead.
like to know if there's a way that Dr. Edwards can say how much better the water is from this most recent test result in July and compare that to last August, say. Is there a general way to say how much less lead is in the water now?
So the numbers that we have show that it's at least 50% better, and in some ways, in terms of the number of houses that have undetectable lead, it's 5 times better than it was. So it depends on how you look at it, but there's no doubt that the water is dramatically better in terms of the amount of discoloration and iron in the water, and lead in the water, regardless of what dimension you look at. But just a simple answer, it's either, it's anywhere from half the lead to 80% lower lead, 50 to 80% lower. Any other questions from the phone? Guess we're good to go.
I think we're good.
Thank you very much appreciate it.